The Soviets and Americans sent a bunch of nuclear reactors into space during the Cold War. What could go wrong?
A lot could go wrong, including one Russian spy satellite that crashed back to Earth in 1978.
It spread radioactive debris all over a stretch of the Northwest Territories in Canada.
But surely the government would swoop in and make everything better, right?
Surely. We're doing a full recap of Operation Morning Light on this episode of So Much Crime,
So Little Time. Hey Dee, let me tell you a story. So yesterday I was sitting in a car dealership where there were a lot of people sitting around just killing time. And I was like fiddling on my phone and my wife was reading a book and I was like, this doesn't feel like a good use of my time. And then it occurred to me what a better use of my time would be to go to patreon.com/SoMuchCrime So Little Time. Check out some early release episodes, some bonus content, some outtakes. And so I just went around the dealership and I told everyone about it. And by the time I left,
loved you there.
Yeah. By the time I left, we had 37 new members on our Patreon. It was awesome. It was a great day.
And then I woke up. Join us on patreon.com/SoMuchCrime So Little Time. Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Dee.
And I'm Jeff. And before we start, we want to give a little warning.
Warning.
This episode is going to have spoilers for Operation Morning Light. We are going to discuss the whole series.
If you haven't listened yet, check out our preview episode on this show. It's the one before this one in your feed.
And we'll also put a link for Operation Morning Light in our show notes. All right, before we get to our discussion, let's talk a little bit about what this series is. So this podcast, Operation Morning Light, came out in late 2022. The host is Dëneze Nakehk'o, who is a veteran broadcast journalist based in Yellowknife in Canada. There are 7 episodes plus a bonus, and each one is about 30 to 40 minutes long. Dee, what was the first episode about?
Episode 1, as per usual, is setting the scene in lots of ways. We start off with the people of Snowdrift, a small indigenous settlement, awakening to the sight of people in white suits stalking the streets of their community, scanning the ground with strange instruments. What transpires is that a nuclear... Jeff, all of this sciencey stuff, I might not say this right, so let me know if I don't. A satellite with a nuclear reactor, Cosmos, fell from the sky on its way down, hit into the Northwest Territories. Big chunks were found in some places, but the rest was kind of like dust all over the ground, spread on the lake, spread on the ground. And there's people, like the people of Snowdrift, who live off of the ground. And so we're left at the end of episode 1 wondering, what about those people?
Let's talk about this series as a whole. What are your kind of initial thoughts, vibes, takeaways, feelings, emotions?
I feel like the preview episode, we discussed quite a lot how artistic and how visual this felt, even though it was obviously an audio medium. I felt like that continued throughout the series. We were getting fragmented parts of the story, obviously the vibe of the fragmented satellite. We were getting different sections of the story throughout, but each section was visual in its own way. I felt like it was really bringing everyone's story to light. So you have I have no idea of anyone's name. You have the two, what were the 2 lads' names? Did you take note of anyone's names, Jeff?
Lance and Bob.
Okay. Even in episode 3, in the line of duty, we are hearing about Lance and Bob. And basically, some long story short, they both end up getting cancer. And this is one of the huge things that has come from this incident is the increase in cancer rates with the people of the area. So when we're hearing about Lance and Bob, I just feel like the story we're hearing is so visual. I can see it happening in front of me. It was the same when we were hearing about in episode 6, the loved ones. We're hearing of George and Celine? Yeah.
George and Celine, yeah.
George and Celine and their kind of love story.
Yeah.
which is like, this episode is like all about like, well, it's hugely centered around their love story and their life growing up, their experience growing up, and then George's cancer and his death ultimately. Like, so emotional, but so like just so visual. And I just feel like it's an interesting way to be describing an audio medium. It was very visual.
It was very visual. I mean, there were a lot of interesting people we met where we got to see, like Selena and George was a good example, where we heard like Celine's sort of her whole life story from when she was a kid, learning to tan a caribou hide.
I loved it. I loved all of that. I loved about hearing about like her mum was in hospital and she needed to learn this. So she couldn't tell anyone what she was doing. So she went to one neighbour and said, I need this thing because this neighbour needs it. And then went to another neighbour and asked for the other thing. And then also, sorry, if you... And then also she was like, up next, I needed a caribou. Was it caribou brain?
Yeah.
But caribou brain. And she's like, I was just like walking down being like, where am I going to get a caribou brain from? And then I see my neighbours left out a caribou head. And I'm like, but like the chances that she's just been left out a caribou head. So she just takes the caribou head home and like makes the brain paste. Anyway, like it's a whole story in itself. Like it feels like it could have been, and maybe each of these episodes could have been like a segment or like a long segment, the main segment of This American Life. Like, because they did stand alone, they were visual in themselves, and there was just so much like emotion, humor. I don't know.
Yeah,
they were each their own little thing, you know?
We shouldn't gloss over how giddy you were talking about caribou brain paste just there. Like, I think that...
It was just such a good story, though.
Yeah,
like,
a 12-year-old girl who, learning this skill through her own ingenuity. And now, you know, her husband died of cancer. She's a grandmother, and she's teaching the grandkids these skills because he's not there to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a whole arc.
And like their whole love story being like, I don't know. I feel like oftentimes women in the love story are the ones who are like cooking the dinner. They're not the ones like taking the brain out. They're not the ones like shooting stuff. And I just, they just seemed to have such a, their relationship seemed to be so even and so like on the same level. I don't know. I thought it was fabulous. I loved it. I do love a love story. So it was a very good episode.
Well, and back to Lance and Bob. So these are the two Mounties who were out. They were sent out to guard the big piece that we heard about in the first episode that was found, the one that looked like antlers sticking out of the ice. And they were making like so many of the people out there. They were drinking water from melted snow, but that snow was apparently full of radiation. And I don't know, I appreciate that we kind of came back to them. I kind of appreciate that this was told from the Dene perspective and from a Dene host, and it was about their people, and it told a lot of the history of their people, but I feel like it also made space for everybody who was affected, and we heard a lot of stories of different types of people who might not have been necessarily friendly with each other, but all these people who got cancer, like they're all connected in this way. And I thought it was a very balanced and even storytelling throughout. Like, I think this affected so many people. And I mean, it's just like one person, everybody just got cancer, right? Like just everybody got cancer. The animals too, right? Like we heard about the 3-eared bunny and the three-eyed
multicolored
fish.
livers.
Yeah, the livers. So that was an interesting way of identifying. I mean, I guess it makes sense if you're a fisherman and you understand what the fish guts should look like. I couldn't tell you what color a liver should be. Do you know what color a fish liver should be?
Do I look like I know what color a fish liver would be?
Oh, no, you know random things. Like you've been like fishing for piranha in the Amazon. I don't know, maybe.
This is very true. I do not know what color it should be, but yeah, I did. I found that fascinating. I think you're so right. Like being able to tell the story of the Dene people like throughout this like was really amazing. And as you said, that there was room for everyone. I think from episode 1 we were a little bit, hey, are they gonna lean into like what seems to be the most important thing? And like, because you had researched, and Dëneze himself was very very strong in how he wanted this story to be told. We felt like it was coming, and I feel like the whole production did such a good job at being able to balance everything out. But I think like the common thread being cancer or fragmentation, lack of communication, lack of caring. I don't know. Like what is the common thread that brings it all together?
Well, I think it's definitely the cancer, but also the sort of lack of accountability that people, we heard about basically everyone seemingly got cancer who was exposed to this. And yet it's one of those things where like some of them are getting cancer, 30, 40 years later. And it's so easy to say, well, it could have been anything. We can't necessarily trace it back to this one event.
Do you know what I was thinking of? And I'm going to explain this, and you're going to have to fill in the gaps because I don't actually know what I was thinking of. But I remember seeing ads, I think last year or the year before, definitely since we moved here, basically being like if army personnel had worked in bases close to insert name of place, that they should get in touch because they might be due compensation because...
Oh, the burn pits?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, the burn pits. Yeah.
So like, I feel like it's not... I don't know much about this burn pit situation, to be fair. But like, it's not like as if it's like wild to think that people would get compensation for the fact that they obviously worked somewhere really dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is...
It's invisible. And I think that's what the kind of last episode was saying. It's like, it's the invisible thing.
I also feel like the sort of irony is you can be exposed to things that will cause cancer. I mean, if you live in California, everything says it causes cancer on it. There's just labels on everywhere you go that this everything you buy, everything around you could cause cancer. And so we've sort of made this tangled web of cancer causing things, and we're just sort of surrounded by it. I mean, it's plastics, it's exhaust fumes, it's everything. So yeah, I don't know. I think the one thing I was thinking about was in episode 2, first of all, there's the guy Robert who worked in Livermore in the Bay Area near us, the Livermore Labs, and who seemed to think this whole thing was a lot of fun, which was a little dark, but I got where he was coming from. Like I understood.
I mean, we gotta
appreciate the science
like,
of it
from his point of view. Like this is like fascinating, and like even like he was the one who built like the more sensitive detector and stuff.
So in that episode, we heard about the ice fishermen who would hear the Soviet subs pinging under the ice, which that's got to be a bizarre thing. Like that was such an incredible image of like, just imagine someone sitting on the ice and hearing this sub, this giant Soviet sub just underneath you.
It's like something from the start of like a James Bond movie or something. Bing, bing, and then...
Oh, but the thing I want to say about that episode is then we heard about how this wasn't the first nuclear reactor that fell from space. There were actually 6 that fell before, including the one from Apollo 13. And the other ones all fell in the ocean. And
Great.
I don't know, why aren't we worried about the ones that fell in the ocean? Like do we not also eat those fish? And like,
I don't know.
Is it not all connected?
I felt like this was such a good podcast, but I'm not gonna lie, it gave me a bit of anxiety. Like I'm like, holy shit. I feel like, and I know this is a bizarre thing to be saying, particularly at the moment, I kind of want to believe the people who are like in charge know what they're doing. And like
really don't.
This podcast is really like putting it in there that they don't. And like not even that they don't, like they don't even kind of care. Like it's like whatever we get away with. You know, one thing that I just was like, here, at one point they were like, the mission has been successful.
Sure. Yeah.
Huge
success.
Found 0.1% of the whole thing. Imagine, just for a moment, imagine in your place of work, if you set your goal for the quarter and it was 0.1% of anything, like how would you be laughed out? I would be absolutely laughed out. Being a success, like celebrating, are you joking?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that stood out to me. Okay. So the other side of that is the idea, and I thought this was really well portrayed by the podcast. They were looking for what was described as peppercorn size bits of radioactive material in the wilderness, in in forests, in lakes, on people's rooftops. And the idea of that spread over hundreds and hundreds of square miles, and you're looking for these peppercorn, and they have detectors, right, to find them, but it seems like, that's an impossible job.
Okay, and I get that, and I feel like that is a fair point. But maybe let the people know so that they can make the decision to leave.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But
I understand that it was an impossible task, but don't just leave and leave all of these people to deal with the repercussions. It just seemed bonkers. And the rubbish that you left behind, they didn't even tidy up after themselves.
Yeah, they didn't. But okay, and if you zoom back from it, one of the things I appreciated about the host and about the presentation of the podcast is, if you step back from it, he talked about all of the absolutely ridiculous, incompetent things like leaving the trash behind, the idea of flying over spots and marking them by throwing these dye-filled condoms, and the first one they throw flies back in their face. The time where they built the 200-person complex at Cosmos Lake, but they built it in the wrong place. They thought they were in the center of everything, but actually they were hundreds of miles away.
Mm-hmm.
And they wasted millions on that. But I don't feel like he was, what's the word? I don't feel like he was condescending or there's inherent condescension in the sort of idiocy of what people were doing and how poorly they went about their job. But it wasn't an indictment of the sort of day-to-day people whose job, these weren't the people making the decisions. I think it's an indictment of the broader system of the higher level government, who were basically looking for a way to sweep this under the rug and pretend it hadn't happened, or pretend they actually did a good job.
Until the rug starts getting these teeny tiny holes in it, seeping up.
Yeah.
The roof, the visual of that roof getting those holes in it.
How much were you thinking about Chernobyl, where they go on the rooftop and they send the people out for those time, go out for a certain number of seconds and collect the pieces on the rooftop?
Do you know what? That actually wasn't the thing that sparked in my head. The image that sparked in my head towards the end of this is, do you remember the Simpsons episode where all the fish start to get extra eyes? And do you not remember that?
I think I remember that. It's been a long time.
And I just had these visuals, especially when they were speaking about the animals and seeing all these different animals and blah blah blah, and I was just
the three-eyed fish is a running joke on The Simpsons.
But
it's less funny now.
I mean, it's only ever funny when it doesn't feel plausible. And now when you're listening to a story where you're oh, I'm sure it was never funny to the Dene people to see that episode of Simpsons, when you're you got no idea. This is real life. This is actually a thing. And they were saying that as well, weren't they, with the SNL sketch with Bill Murray? These things are funny until you're oh shit, this is, and that's I think the anxiety that came with it. I thought this was an excellent podcast, but
that Saturday Night Live bit was,
I just rather not know.
Yeah. I feel like that was a good example of sort of getting a sense of how this was portrayed in the media at the time, including the sort of satirical media, right? This was Saturday Night Live, what I guess the original cast with Bill Murray and talking about these mutated lobsters or whatever, and played for laughs, but I
mean, what really else can you do? It is not funny, but if you don't laugh, cry.
But that, and I think I forget which episode it was, but where we heard about how, I think from the Canadian government's perspective, it was well, we focused on the areas where people, the communities where they live, but to the Dene people, they live in the wilderness, right? These are people who go out and they hunt and they trap and they fish, and their homes are just places where they leave their stuff, where they go out to get to actually live. And so saying just don't go in the forest, or just that doesn't work. That doesn't, it's such a different mindset. Like we cleaned your yard, but place where you actually spend all of your time and where you get your food, or like the people.
But did
like
they
all the people
actually clean their yard though? Because it was seeping into the ground. I do want to talk about that a little bit, because it's hard to know here if the difference between the protection or the treatment of people was because like the Dene people were like, and indigenous people were, you know, like what's the factor here? Is it just because of the sheer number of people and the improbability of the government, like, or the impossibility of the task of cleaning things up? Like what was it? Because in episode 1, and I think in episode 2, we're hearing about planes landing, US like helicopters or whatever landing, and people who have seen the, like, you know, the whatever they're calling it, the caribou antlers, like that big part of the satellite, and they have like touched it for a second, and they're walking over, you know, to the people coming off the helicopter, and they're like giving like a stay away sign. And then all of like the US people coming down and wearing the big suits, like kind of hazmat suits, and keeping themselves protected, like so very protected. And yet that is not how they treated the people of Snowdrift at all, even slightly. They didn't even let them know what was happening.
Yeah, no, this very much felt to me like, I think, and this is maybe not the best metaphor, but this is like E.T., where the people come in, they want to protect themselves.
Where I thought you were going with that.
Okay.
Okay.
No, but I mean, in that movie, right? Like the government realizes there's an alien living in this house in L.A., and they come in their white suits and they put their tubing up and their plastic sheeting up, and they're not really there to protect Elliot, or, you know, they don't really care about him. They just want to study the alien. Like they want to learn from it and not get sick themselves. In the same way, I feel like here, the people who came in wanted to protect themselves. And I mean, the U.S. government was not interested, it seems, in actually cleaning up this nuclear mess. The Soviets certainly weren't, but it seems like the whole interest was in what can we learn from the Soviet nuclear technology.
Yeah, and what you're not mentioning there is actually the people. Like the people were, they didn't give a shit, and like they're coming in to clean up a mess, or they want to make sure that, I don't know. To me, it just felt like every time we were speaking about an American or a Canadian, we're speaking about some level of protection for the most part. Maybe it was mainly the Americans, but like even the 3 young lads who had gone off and like on their like, I don't like my privilege anymore expedition, and they, you know, had touched it, and they had to go through this whole hullabaloo to be washed down and make sure that they were safe. But like none of the kids in the school, none of the people who like grow their food in the ground there, like there was just nothing. And it felt like every episode I was waiting for the something. Like they have to have done something. They did nothing. I mean, like actually nothing.
But I mean, I think we saw this in Chernobyl in a way, right? I think the other thing I was thinking about was, we were talking earlier today, well, I was listening to This American Life about Dr. Strangelove. Have you seen Dr. Strangelove?
No.
Such a good movie. That's a great dark comedy movie about nuclear war. But in Dr. Strangelove, I feel like you have this, so for people who have seen it, you have this contrast between the American president and his whole team in the war room debating, like, what are we going to do about this impending nuclear war? And they're so removed. Like they ultimately are really just focused on themselves, like these men, and their sort of needs and desires. And they kind of don't care at all about the hundreds of millions of people whose lives are at risk. It's a satire, but it also feels real right now. Like it's
I was gonna say, not on my top of my list to be entertained by.
It is very funny. Also, I think James Earl Jones' first role.
Oh, interesting.
And then Peter Sellers plays 3 different characters, and he's fantastic in it.
Come here. Going back to the actual podcast we're supposed to be talking about, the 3 young lads, I'm going to go back to them, right?
Yeah.
there was this moment when, so they got taken away from their like gap year or whatever they're calling it, and then they get brought back when they're told that it's fine to go back. And there was this weird moment when they were giving out about the Canadians, I think. Was it the
in their camp?
Yeah. They were like, they went in, they like drank all our whiskey.
Drank their whiskey. You don't do that.
They like did something weird with their dogs. So it was all like off. And there was this moment where one of the guys was basically baffled that they just came in and messed everything up for us. Like they came into our home and they messed everything up for us. I was just like, this is what they have done like everywhere. Like this is, they will just come in and they will do what they want. Like this is, I'm sure, how a lot of Indigenous peoples feel when it's like, well, either move or like we're building this thing here, so it's up to you. And I don't know, that it just seemed to be this I don't know, was it privilege? I don't know if it was, I don't know the word I'm trying to like,
it's privilege,
put my finger on, but like, how dare they do this to us? And I'm like, well, yeah. Anyway, I just thought it was an interesting like comparison.
We heard a little bit of this with the reference to the oil pipeline debate and the tar sands, and I mean it's the story of several hundred years of you're fine to keep living in the place that doesn't get in our way until we discover something in your land, whether it's gold or oil or something that we want, and then suddenly it's no longer okay for you to live there, and we're going to find an excuse to get rid of you. And I mean, in this case, it was the residential schools, right? Like to sort of de-Indian them. I mean, we've talked about this before. I don't know. We heard the story. I forget who it was. Was it Celine? It was somebody who was like 16 and sent to one of these schools.
No, Celine mentions it, I think. She also mentions how she taught a lot of, the people living there now when they were in kindergarten. But now they're like losing the language. Yeah.
Because she teaches the language. We heard about that in episode 1. That's one of the things she does. I mean, and that's going on all over the world right now, right? Like these languages are being lost.
Yeah. And I mean, it's happened in Ireland, although there's like a semi-revival of the Irish language again. But yeah, it's hard.
No, I read stories about Indigenous people in the U.S. where they're like the last person who speaks the language left, and they're trying to document the language, trying to create an oral history, trying to create a written version of the language. But when those people are gone, like there's no one to carry it on. Like there's just no one left who speaks it, and that culture is just lost.
Must be so weird, like to have grown up immersed in a culture and to literally before your eyes see it dying out.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. That's
I couldn't find anything good on Reddit, but I do have one from cabinradio.ca. Is .ca Canada? I presume it is.
Probably, yeah.
Okay. The series was named one of the best podcasts of 2022 by the Financial Times and described it as captivating in a review by The Guardian. Did we know that? We probably did. Okay, sorry.
I knew the Financial Times thing. Yeah.
This one is a 5 out of 5. This is from greatpods.co. This is from Fiona Sturgis in the Financial Times. In a story that is part Fargo, part Stranger Things, this is more than a tale of Soviet intrigue. However, aided by an eerie and evocative sound palette, bask in its whipping wind and the distant tinkling of dog sleds, Operation Morning Light tells of a land that is beautiful but unyielding.
I agree with that review. That was poetically stated.
I enjoy it. Okay. This James Marriott in the Times UK gave it a 4 out of 5. Not sure why it was 4. Divertingly atmospheric. I like this sort of podcast. No real point. No murder or anything. I mean, I think your definition of murder might have to be looked up, but anyway. I mean, just a pleasant way to gather interesting interviews, archive footage, and historical speculation around one dramatic event. Dëneze, a member of an Indigenous community on whose land the satellite landed, he brings us awestruck eyewitness testimony. It's eerie, atmospheric, and occasionally rather beautiful. I think that last sentence is great, but I do think I'm going to have to message James Marriott and just ask him to define murder for me, and also ask him to define what one dramatic event is, because I feel like we heard of many dramatic events throughout this. Like one majorly dramatic event, but like every episode had a bit of something.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we classify these as murder stories or scam stories or, I guess I don't know what I'd classify this as. It's sort of a disaster story. What subgenre of true crime would you say this is?
Well, what would we call it if someone knowingly gives people a disease?
What's a parallel? Like, what's another one like that?
Well, I mean, what's coming to mind, which is not the same, but one of the ones that's coming to mind is Yale Hospital, no pain medication.
The retrievals?
The retrievals.
Yeah.
It's like you're knowingly putting people in agony, hurting their minds, their spirits, their bodies, their chance of giving birth.
This is the same genre as the retrievals in a way. I'm not sure what to call that genre. It's something like
fucked up institutional misconduct.
It's like institutional crimes.
It is. But then I feel like institutional crimes makes it sound cold. It kind of sterilizes it. Like it's just a crime against an institution. Like this is like a mass. Yeah. Both of them were like this impacted so many people in ways that are not as clear cut as one person is hurt.
Let's leave it here. If anyone listening has a suggestion for what to call this genre, leave a comment. Let us know what you think.
Yeah.
Kyle.
We need like a better acronym or a better like catchier phrase than like fucked up institutional misconduct.
FUIP. Fucked up institutional misconduct.
Oh, fucked up.
Foop. Fume. That's bad.
Fuming. It would make sense if you're sorry.
What's your closing thought on this podcast?
Would recommend. It's fantastic. I think the descriptions we read, eerily beautiful. Dëneze like made it for me. The tone of the voice, the connection, the emotion. Loved it.
Yeah, he's a terrific host.
Love
to talk to him. Yeah, I agree. I think this was very artfully done. I thought it was very well researched. I thought it was. I really just enjoyed listening to. I learned a lot about the Dene people, about Canada, about this. I mean, this story that I knew nothing about, and I mean, like we talked about at the beginning, like it was so full of interesting stories of people and these people's lives. Yeah, I was totally hooked on this and would definitely recommend it. 100%.
Love that. Before you find out what we're covering next week, don't forget to leave us a comment on Instagram and rate us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. 5 out of 5, please.
Dee, what's coming up next time?
Next time, we're going to Scotland, where it's November 2004, when Alistair Wilson, a banker aged 30, living in Scotland, was shot to death on his doorstep. We are going to hear the story of one of Scotland's most baffling unsolved cases. We will be previewing the doorstep murder. That's on the next So Much Crime,
So Little Time.
So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of MimeGov Media. The executive producer is Paxton Calariso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show in your podcast app. Don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.